Hello and welcome to the MIT Open Documentary Lab talk. I'm Sarah Wallazin, I'm the director of the lab, and today it's my great pleasure to introduce the team behind the Changing Same VR project that just premiered at Sundance. It's three directors: Joe Brewster, who's a Harvard-trained psychiatrist and used his psychological training to inform his work, and Yasmin Elayat, who's an immersive director and co-founder of Scatter Foundation, or Scatter Studios, sorry, which coined the volumetric filmmaking term and work, and Michèle Stephenson, who uses her Panamanian and his Haitian roots to really radically rethink storytelling. They're extremely accomplished, and you can read more about them in their bios in our description. And I also wanted to say it's a particular joy to bring them and this project to this talk series because it has roots in our lab and studio. Kat Cizek, who's the artistic director of Co-Creation Studio, was at the Skoll Foundation to work with Michèle around co-creation, and this VR project emerged from that. So without further ado, I'm going to send it over to them. But let me say before one thing, we're going to do it a little differently today. Please put your questions in the Q&A and also use the raise hand icon because we will call on you to ask your questions directly to them. So as I said before, without further ado, Joe, Yasmin, and Michèle.
It's a pleasure.
Hi, nice to meet you. Thank you, MIT, for having us here. And Yasmin's going to take it away and drive us through our slides as we go through it.
Yes, hi. Just confirming that you see my screen. Everything is ready to go.
Confirmation.
All right, thank you. All right. Well, hi. I'm also, it's my pleasure to be here. And we're going to start off with the trailer. Michèle or Joe, would you like to sort of set up what the audience is about to see?
No, I'm good.
I can set it up just a little bit. So, you know, Scatter Studios and RADA have come together to create this virtual experience called The Changing Same, Episode 1, The Dilemma, which premiered at Sundance. It's the first part of a trilogy that we are creating and working on. And we wanted to kind of sort of start to get you in the world by showing you the trailer that we put together for the festival.
Stand back and watch for the closing doors.
Oh, I can see you're curious. You want to enter?
We got a call. This call describes you perfectly. You're gonna have to come with us.
You fit the description. Black, wearing clothing. Shouldn't be surprised by this.
Listen, these are some serious charges. A Class D felony assault carries a 3 to 7 year sentence in this state.
I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. I'm a free man.
What's it gonna be? Guilty or not guilty?
Stand back.
Well, I guess first I wanted to say it's very honored to be here with my partners. And I think we wanted to preface this by saying that story is everything for us. And we tell story because we think it's politically important and personally important. And if I do not exist without my story being told, and that's an experience, and that's something I've learned over the decades that I've been on this earth. I kind of want to tell a story about MIT. I spent 13, 14 years there. And so I have very fond memories of this institution. I'm going to leave it at that. Next slide. Many of you have seen our work, but what you should know is we came together to work on this project 5 years ago. Michèle and I are a couple. We have 2 children, one of which has spoken to you earlier this year because he is a maker on his own. But I think what I wanted to say, if I'm going to mention something about us, is that we have a process, a way of working, and that the making of The Changing Same and all of our work really follows a pattern of getting to know each other, diving deeply into the work and treating each other as equals in every way. We'll get a little bit more into that later. Okay. And part of our process is getting to know us. So that's me on the left with the oversized suit. And what you need to know is I love that suit. And only recently did I realize that that was a hand-me-down. But I was maybe 10 years old then when I realized, growing up in Los Angeles, they called it South Central. Now they call it Central. I realized that when I would turn on the television, I never saw myself. And I never saw my parents. So about that age, I wrote Walt Disney. And I asked them to make a movie about the family that I loved and the neighborhood I loved, and that I never saw publicly unless it was on the 6 o'clock news. Walt Disney never responded, and we should all thank him because that is why I'm a maker today. Next slide.
All right. Well, this is me, and I'm a first generation Egyptian American who grew up between the United States and Egypt, and I grew up to my two immigrant parents, growing up to stories of how they grew up under a black cloud of dictatorship. And the way they used to describe Egypt was, living under this kind of this oppressive and stagnant regime, and a country that you don't really believe or feel like it belongs to you. And so, in 2011, when the Egyptian Revolution began, I moved to Egypt, and I, worked on my first sort of new media documentary in this space. And I did so because it was the first time you'd see generations of Egyptians able to reclaim their own history. And that ownership of history was very, very liberating. And it was liberating for the country. It was liberating for my family and for myself to witness. And so I know that for me, the power of reclaiming history and the value of it and the change that it requires is really sort of central to my work and what I'm interested in. And so I would say that since that experience and the years on, my work has been dedicated to exposing, untold stories or unearthing histories using emerging technology.
Just a quick dial back. I think for us, Joe is kind of setting the stage that's me at 9 years old. But the idea that we are talking about our personal and our childhood and where we come from is part of our process. we can't really understand point of view or the baggage we bring to stories and the point of views and how we tell stories without knowing about ourselves. What has made us tick? What is the trauma we've been through? What kind of intergenerational things do we carry on inside us that somehow motivate us to either tell stories or to do other things, or choose science, or choose, you know, computer technology. And for me, you know, I'm that what they call 1.5 generation that was coined, came to North America at a very young age. At 1 year, I was 1 year old. So I don't have a memory of living in Haiti, that we fled as a result of a dictatorship. But I have lived in the environment with the idea and notion of what does being connected to that land mean? And what was definitely carried over was the racial caste system, in addition to systems of patriarchy that I kind of lived through, and that took a certain flavor living in North America. All based around how our family interactions and how white supremacy sort of affected both our personal as well as our interactions with the public sphere. And so for me, through a circuitous way, filmmaking is not, or storytelling is not my first career, but I came to it through a kind of this search of what can satisfy me. How do I look at intergenerational trauma? How do I work through that in a way that helps me personally, but also sort of leave something behind? And I came to storytelling, you know, in my 30s, early 30s, well, when I actually met Joe and embarked on this journey that I think has been fulfilling on multiple levels. So let's move on.
So a little bit about, you know, our studios and what we do, because it's also quite, this co-creation process really speaks true to, you know, what both of our companies have been dedicated to doing. So I'm one of the co-founders of Scatter, and Scatter is an immersive creative company. We're based in Brooklyn, New York. And we have been pioneering a genre of immersive media that we call volumetric filmmaking, which is essentially the marriage of gaming and filmmaking. So we leverage the power and flexibility of a game engine and marry it with the craft and sensibility of filmmaking. And the idea is to feature real people and real stories and real places that are volumetrically captured and inside of the 3D worlds that we construct. And we have a body of original award-winning XR work that has premiered across various film festivals since 2014. Our work has exhibited widely, you know, including the Museum of Modern Art and the World Economic Forum. And one thing that's really unique about our approach, and that's really core to our ethos, is the fact that art drives innovation. And what I mean by that is in the process of creating our films, our volumetric films, and to achieve the creative vision, we find that the tools out there are pretty lacking. And so what we do as a company, and part of our creative process, is we build the tools to achieve the creative vision. So story making and tool building together allow us to push the limits of our creativity. And that's how we, you know, this is how we approach this project too. And how volumetric filmmaking is powered through our work is our tool depth kit, which is an accessible software toolkit for volumetric video capture that uses off-the-shelf hardware like depth sensors and a laptop.
So you want to start us on that when we talk about Rada Studio?
No, you can take it away, Michèle.
Anyway, so the reason, so for us at Rada Studio, we've been around for what, 2 decades now, I guess. And our work has been centered, when we talk about character, we're really centralizing the story around the participants that we work with in the stories that we tell. And it's anchored around emotion, but also around complicating not just the narrative, but also complicating the people that we are as we are represented in the stories that we tell. So it's the anti-stereotype, I would say, in terms of how we work and how we build story. And we wanted to bring that into the volumetric filmmaking space, into the 3D space. We had experienced a lot of, as Yasmin mentioned, the idea of the artistic and the beauty that we saw in the 3D space. But we felt that we could bring something around story and connection and the commonality around the human condition. And that's the work that we've done, both shorts and features. And there was this mission for us, not just in the film and the stories that we tell, but also this idea in the volumetric space, the 3D space, to kind of lay a stake on the ground in terms of being our own masters of our own stories and laying a space there, understanding that there are pioneers who've come before us in this space from the various communities that we're a part of. Joe, you want to add anything?
Yeah, that was a very nice quote that Yasmin started. Art drives innovation, and I think that's why I love Scatter and our partnership with them. But we're the second half of that, and we're emotion and pretty pictures drive action, and so if you and the marriage of the two really makes a complete entity. And what I am saying is that if you look at the body of our work, it is very emotional. It involves characters that you don't normally see. And the result of that, characters that we've been told on numerous occasions that are not commercially viable, that have caused such an amazing outpouring of action and discussion worldwide. That conversation series had over 50 million people talking about race, white supremacy in a way that hadn't been done prior to that. American Promise, which is a film that we made, and we were told, well, why would someone want to follow a Black middle-class family? But what we were able to do is add these elements, and we created an outreach program that reached almost 40 million Americans, talking about ways in which to improve education. Next slide.
Yasmin, you want to?
Sure. Yeah, and so this brings us to the project that we're discussing today, The Changing Same, which premiered at Sundance this year, 2021, as part of the New Frontier selection. And as we've mentioned, The Changing Same has been in progress and in development for the last 5 years. And what it is it's a magical realist time travel virtual reality experience through 400 years of racial terror and racial injustice in America. And we call it an American pilgrimage, where the user travels through the past, present, and future to witness the cyclical nature of racial injustice in our shared collective history. Handing this off to you, Joe or Michèle, if you'd like to talk about sort of the process and the origin story.
Well, I think Sarah mentioned it earlier. We were involved in the Skoll Fellowship, and we were paired with the Equal Justice Initiative and Brian Stephenson to think about ways in which to tell the story of racial injustice over the last 400 years. That ultimately resulted in envisioning a three-part film series. In addition, they gave us a little bit of seed money, and with that seed money, we were investigating other ways of telling this story. That involved a fair amount of research and a brain trust, but what we ultimately decided is VR, XR allowed us to tell this story in a very unique way, because the story involved the past, the present, and how that would ultimately inform the future. in virtual reality, we could have them all exist simultaneously. Michèle?
Yeah, and so our objective of having that led to working with Yasmin, and maybe we can go to the next slide. And part of the process, you know, we talked about this earlier, about this kind of anchored mission, you know, to tell stories in a way that is sort of unapologetic. And for us, being able to collapse time in this 3D space and feeling that we needed to tell a story that felt native to the 3D space was extremely important. But we also knew that not everyone wanted, you know, that we were unearthing history that not everyone wanted to look at or to experience. And so we took this magical realist lens for us because we felt it was very important and anchored in the way our communities tell stories, but understood that we were going to take that challenge, that for us, the story had value, that if we wanted to see it, we knew that there would be others. And so we took that chance. What it meant, though, was a longer journey, right? Which led to a development phase that was almost 5 years long. And we are at the 20-minute mark. So, but I think we're on good track here. So, Yasmin, do you want to talk to the world building a little bit?
Yeah, as we've been talking about, this project has been in the making for a while, and part of the process of creating, first of all, a completely room scale immersive project, but also, as we've mentioned, there's time travel, there's the idea of representing 400 years of history. There's also what is magical realism in the changing same world, and what is Afrofuturism, and sort of defining that. And I'd say that in the development phase, there was layers of research that went into this project. There is obviously historical research of where the worlds and the eras and the time periods that were going to be represented in the project, which we can speak more to. There was also this entire, collection of research that we're calling the world building phase. And essentially what that is a design and discovery process, and and also sort of the actual conceptual visual world building part of it. And the way that it unfolded for us is, it started actually with a process I'd call of definitions, as I was saying, kind of laying the groundwork and the foundational work for this world. And, what is magical realism for the changing same? And, and you'll see, if anyone has seen the piece, or if maybe you can gather from hints from the trailer, our magical realism in this world evolved into this sort of subtle magical realism of this world, but a little different, a little off. And to do so, besides actually kind of defining what the worlds would look like in the visuals, we also had to translate that to other elements of XR and start defining that. So what are the kind of experiential tools at our disposal to still, approach it from the magical realism lens? What does time travel look like? What does physics look like? What would 400 years look like, and how can we represent them? And so that's sort of what a lot of the type of kind of design, discovery, and research phase that contributed to the world building. I don't know, Joe and Michèle, would you like to add any more to sort of this? There's a lot, obviously, of work in this phase.
Sure.
Yeah.
This is maybe. We were actually advantaged by not being able to build this piece as quickly as we wanted. If someone had given us $1 million and said, build this, we would not be at the same state. I mean, world building started with a process of each of us claiming our space, each of us getting to know each other. Each of us allowing each other to say things that were just bizarre, quirky, but actually taken seriously. So we defined the physics of the space, how we would move in the space. But we also really spent a lot of time thinking about other assumptions, the assumptions of how would we how do we deal with the trauma of unearthing these memories? Chapter 2 has a lynching. How would we avoid the repetition of repeating these trauma in a gratuitous manner? And we came to some interesting solutions, not just saying, okay, we have to deal with it, but we began to understand that for every traumatic event, the Black community has had tens of thousands of living moments. And so how do you describe that? How do you place that in a VR environment so that is a more radical, complete vision of a world that actually mirrors what, you know, I saw growing up in South Central Los Angeles?
Yeah, I think there was an idea of including Black joy as well as Black resistance and the violence, and the three, how they interact with each other. But I think the magical realist tool also helped us to confront certain things in a way that made sense. And then there was, I don't know if you mentioned this, Yasmin, this idea of really memorializing spaces through photogrammetry. And what you're seeing there are trees, I think they were partially photogrammetry captured. So bringing the real spaces and playing with them in the 3D space.
Yeah, that's a nice transition to exactly this slide, which is, you know, just to speak more to what Michèle is referencing, is there's a real true convergence of form and content here with volumetric filmmaking and the story. To create this project and actually to build the worlds are constructed from real places. And as Michèle was saying, you know, we sent a team, a reality capture team, to Marianna, Florida, which is sort of the original site of, you know, of the origin story of this project, the worst spectacle lynching in America, which, you know, the Claude Neal lynching, which is where this project completely started and where a lot of the characters and as I said, the story was based on. And this is an example of the Cracker House, which you saw in the trailer, you seeing in our slides. This is actually there and captured through a process called photogrammetry. And for those that don't know, it's basically a series of taking thousands and thousands of photos and reconstructing them into 3D. And that's exactly how we built our world. So the actual locations are not only memorializing the sites of the actual Claude Neal lynching, the dirt road, and parts of, you know, the oak tree and parts of in the swamps and the cypress trees, but it's also a way to recontextualize and reframe the story as well. So it was really core to the world building, but it's also core to the core to the values of the project, and as I said, this kind of convergence of intention of how we're making the project and the story we're telling. So this is going to bring us into how this project went and during COVID. I don't know, maybe I'll hand it off to you, Joe, if you'd like to kick us off.
So for those of you who are interested, this is $1 million project, and we had nowhere near $1 million. And again, what we did have is seed money, and we were able to spend a considerable amount of time envisioning the project. I think I think another advantage and we learned is that when we have something that is an amazing document and blueprint, we use the funds that we had to design the project in total. And so when we showed these documents to the gatekeepers, they wanted to see the project. So we were accepted to Sundance probably 8 weeks prior to the start of the building of this piece, based on a blueprint. And then we had the job of building this project in 8 weeks. That involved us coming up with a team of almost 20, 25 makers on 3 continents, and guerrillaing this the production. But I think what we did have is a very fine blueprint. Michèle?
Yeah, just to talk about process. So what essentially happened during our evolution, we went from a 15-page script that we thought was going to be a 20-minute one-off piece to deciding, okay, we're not raising enough to do this full vision. Let's do a prototype that we can then use as a fundraising tool. But then that led to, why don't we make this episodic and make our prototype into a fully kind of conceived episode 1 of a trilogy. And we did that just as we were accepted at Sundance, and Sundance invited us in, and then, you know, it was the race was on for 8 weeks. We had not started production yet, but we got the green light from Sundance. We thought we had enough to be able to finish this first episode, and some money came in to support us. You know, there's nothing like the stamp of Sundance or these other sort of upper tier festivals for people to look at you differently, for people to look at, we didn't change, our story didn't change, but the world changed in 2020, the uprisings happened, and things and viewpoints changed, right? And so suddenly accountability changed, Sundance brought us in, and we got the support to get, but what that meant was a 5-week, an 8-week sprint that was unimaginable because, and I'm gonna pass this on to Yasmin, in the process, there was actually hacking and workflow that was being invented. So there was invention happening during this process as we were trying to make it to Sundance, because we were pushing the bar as to what could happen and what we could create in a 3D space within that constrained time. So yes, want to speak to that?
But before Yasmin chimes in, I just wanted to stress the fact that we understood that some folks had been accepted, but to Sundance, and that we raised twice as much money as we had raised in the previous 4 years with that acceptance. But we also clearly understood that we were pushing boundaries technologically, and that made this even more difficult. And you'll see that we had to create new workflows, we had to create new technology just to accomplish that. But the advantage of having this time to create, we had created things that that had never been done before. Normally when you walk into a VR project or XR and you are allowed to look over the precipice of life, and you stand and you watch passively as the world passes you by or moves underneath you. This, you are in the stars, you are floating, you are time traveling, and no one had done that before.
Yeah, to add to sort of add on to what Joe and Michèle are saying, it's not only is this, I call this project the most ambitious volumetric film in the world to date, and I'll explain why. Besides, you know, I'll actually you know give some context, but in addition to also being very ambitious and pulling off things, you know, workflows that didn't exist and having to R&D while we're in production. And the fact that this entire team is completely 100% remote through 3 continents, we're also talking about production during COVID, which is a whole other challenge as well. And so, you know, I'll talk a little bit about, you know, the layers of innovation that happened to pull this project off. One is the production context of how do you shoot safely during COVID, obviously with needing to give, so, you know, there's this workflow here where it's almost like a virtual production workflow, but for volumetric capture is the best way to describe it. So ways of, you know, giving context to each actor who's acting completely individually alone, you know, to be obviously compliant during COVID, but also how do you recreate some of these altercations when you have a police altercation with one of our characters, or how do you have dialogue that is seamless and smooth? Also, how do you know where, you know, how does the character have the context when they're shooting in a complete green screen of what is exactly around them and the different characters also in the space? So we created this sort of like hybrid, as I said, virtual production workflow that also was streamed completely through Zoom, you know, and so you'd see, through Google Hangouts. So, you know, obviously the directors are on, the cinematographer, the actor. And if so, it was using, you know, leveraging sort of the tools we're normally doing. Everyone's on Zoom anyways, and like video tools, but with this additional layer that was quite innovative to aid in the production process itself.
Oh, we have about 5 minutes left, sorry.
Oh, 5 minutes. Okay, so then we can kind of zoom quickly. And please jump in, obviously, Joe and Michèle. I was going to talk a little bit about some of the other innovative processes that we approached this project with, which is, one is in the development of the characters, there's this new workflow that we were quite excited about, which we call it like a hybrid avatar. But one of our characters here is Harriet, and she's essentially a mix of volumetric capture using DepthKit, our software, and motion capture. And we married the two to create this, this kind of effect where you have this real person on top of a completely 3D modeled, simulated second part of her body, the second half. And to pull this off, she's also 13 feet. So we had to pull this new workflow off. There's several layers, obviously, of testing and development, but also during the shoot, we had to sort of, you know, place models, kind of fake the sort of eye line and the positioning of where the user would be in the actual game engine to really create this effect. And also, as I said, we were testing and playing around with how to marry these two workflows, which was not an easy feat. But the result is, hopefully when you get to see it in the VR experience, a quite magical, as I said, hybrid avatar of this quite magical character, Harriet. I don't know if Joe and Michèle, you'd like to speak a little more about Harriet or this workflow, or what she represents also in the piece.
Well, just quickly, well, Harriet is an iconic figure. She represents a force for us. She's not quite human, but she represents the ancestors and the future. So it was she's a crucial part of our story, who comes in and out of the user's experience through the 3 episodes. But just very briefly, that green screen that you see there is where we shot. And we had to shoot one actor at a time. And we had to reimagine the eye lines and imagine the dialogue as we were in the midst of shooting. And I don't know if you spoke about the 360 capturing, the first time I think that all those cameras have been rigged for DepthKit that we were able to capture. And the end result so far in the episode is what you see on the right, but I think we need to sort of wrap up.
So let me start with this wrap up, because we talk about technology, we talk about story, but let's talk about the team. How do you get 20-something people to work on this? All the effing, excuse my French, time. Like, this is around the clock. And so they buy in. And they buy in because the process that we started in the beginning, getting to know each other, understanding each other's politics, respecting people's point of view, it allowed people who made 2 to 3 times as much to buy in for this 8-week gig in which they basically gave up their lives. And I think they didn't see it as giving up their lives. They saw it as their project. And they committed to a cause. We have a designer who's like the world's expert in designing rocks, and he makes these rocks for as much as this whole piece for major game developers, right? This whole piece cost us to make and his name is not even on the project. But he spoke to having the opportunity to stand up for something, and an opportunity to make something that he thought was going to make a lasting impression on someone's mind, maybe one of the 91 people sitting in this audience. But I just want to make that point, that it's not just about the art, it's about creating a collaborative community that respects each other. And I think we accomplished that, except for maybe one guy.
Oh, right. Well, thank you. So, I mean, what's next is community engagement. We're being very intentional about what does community distribution look like with such a high-tech, tech-heavy, literally heavy process. And we have a few collaborators and partners who are working with us on that, so we can actually, you know, not just do the museums, which is an intention, and festivals, but also be able to have the experience in local libraries, in classrooms as well.
I'll also add that, you know, we still have a few more, you know, episodes left in this project, in this series, and so we're looking for partners as well and funders to complete the series and to release them. And we're excited for the world to get to see the first episode completed, but also our future episodes as well.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. If you want to stop sharing. It's an incredible story, just hearing the process. I'm sure there's so much more. We have several questions here for you. As I said, we're going to try something a little different today and let people ask their questions directly. So Nikita, if you want to raise your hand, press the raise hand icon, you will be able to ask your question directly.
Hello, do you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. I saw episode 1 on Sundance. It was incredible. I'm wondering just when episode 2 and 3 are coming, what's your production release timeline? Or it depends on always unpredictable.
Right now, episode 2 and 3, I mean, the hope is that, you know, by the end of the year, we have those 2 done, but our more immediate focus is to really refine episode 1 and put it, you know, sort of, and close it, because we were on such a sprint to Sundance that there are elements that we had to, you know, put on standby. So we want to fully realize episode 1, and it will do the festival circuit, and parallelly will be fundraising for episode 2 and 3 with the intention of being able to complete the trilogy by the end of the year.
Awesome, awesome. And my second question, you mentioned 5 years of development. So I'm wondering, what was your scope of work prior to this 8 weeks of production? Was it like technical development, conceptual, or?
There was a lot. I mean, I can start a little bit. There was actually quite a lot of work. This project started originally as a documentary, actually in the beginning. So 5 years ago, it was a documentary project. And I would say through the best way to describe it is I call it a design and discovery process. I'd say, like, you know, I love the way Joe describes it as making space for the collaborators. I'd say part of the co-creation process between all 3 of us was sort of defining where this project could go, essentially. And I would say the script, you know, Jean-Michel can speak more to this, the script had evolved over the 5 years. This definition work that I described earlier, all the concept art for the entire series, the world building for the entire series. So even though we focus on episode 1, we've been always thinking holistically and always thinking about the entire project and the world building holistically. And we also did a lot of R&D technical development during this time as well to even test that these workflows were even possible, because it's, you know, we're professionals. We're not going to just jump into a 6-week sprint without knowing if it's proven. So we did do some of the this motion capture testing and prototyping, and we tested various technologies as well. So it's not just one, we tested several to see what would be our recommendation moving into production. I don't know if Joe and Michèle, you wanted to add more to.
Well, I think on the script story side, we did several readings with actors, a number of them that brought us back to the drawing board also for refining the script. And we, yeah, and the 5 years allowed us to end up in a fiction space where I think is probably, you know, it's a hybrid because there are actual spaces that are represented here through photogrammetry and others, and we are there. This is inspired by the short film that Joe and I did called also The Changing Same documentary, but this is a complete sort of fictionalized space. So I think part of it, a big time was spent on conceptualizing time travel. I saw there was another question about how do you create imagery that references, you know, the past. And we spent a lot of time on what is the time travel mechanism and how do we make it work so that there are symbols, there are references that you can, at different levels of cognition for the ones, for the user who goes through that experience. And that took a lot of unpacking.
So I just want to address your question, not head on, but point out that what we did to develop this piece is live life. And so you say, what is that? Well, we made 5 or 6 other films. Some of the films involve concepts in terms of anti-Blackness, in terms of visuals that we've incorporated in this work. And so we're not about creating one work, we're creating a body of work. And that body of work really speaks to our own personal interests. And so look us up. You'll see that we're doing lots of things. And if we can steal from Peter to pay Paul, we will steal a concept, and we're also enjoying our friends' work. We can point out several elements of this piece that we borrowed with some permission. And so what is my point? My point is that it's the art is not about this one piece. Like we all strive for a better future. And so it's really not just about this, it's about how we treat our sons, whether or not we take your calls, if you call us asking us for advice, and how much of your work we incorporated into this project, or version 2 or version 3. Anyway, I don't mean to make fun of the question. I just want us to look at the big picture.
Yeah. Excellent response. Thank you so much. I appreciate this.
Wonderful. We have a question from Grace Wu. Grace, if you want to ask your question. You just have to hit the raise hand.
Oh, there we go. There, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So thanks so much for sharing the story and work. So just for some context, I haven't had the opportunity to see the film yet on Sundance, but I'm really excited about it. I love how you were talking about how AR, VR gaming allows us to travel across time and space, and it throws off our, sense of bounded geography. I'm just wondering if you could speak about the process in choosing the stories, and if there were any real life storytellers or participants you were working with, and if so, what was the co-story narration process like? How did you approach ethical considerations? Yeah, thank you.
Grace, that is not possible in 5 minutes.
I know.
But what I would start with is go to PBS, POV, and Google or search for The Changing Same. It is the short film or the character that we base this piece on.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and like I was saying earlier, it was more of an inspiration. The site of Mariana, you know, you go there, it's very heavy with ghosts. You know, I feel you can feel the lynching of 1934 as you walk around. It's got a heavy history, and that's what partially the beauty and the heaviness of it is what we were transposing into this. But everything else is fictionalized. I mean, Lamar, who is the guide in the piece, is really a hybrid fictionalized character that's born out of our lived experience and relationships with some of the people that we met and participated with for the short film, but he's also just his own person. And the actor brought in his interpretation of who he felt Lamar was, as did Harriet, you know, who is not a, you know, who is a what was the word? A composite of multiple different, you know, representations of what we had in our head. So it was definitely much more living in the fiction space than in the more participatory documentary space.
And when we took from real life, we took from our own lives. You know, my father left Texas in 1940, East Texas. And you might be surprised or not that he left because he was afraid of being lynched. He moved to Los Angeles and he left with millions who went to LA, they went to Oakland, they went to Seattle because they were afraid of the terror that they were experiencing on a day-to-day basis. And so hearing this story, you know, was allowed me to plumb my own story, my father's story. And when my father left, and I drone on, his neighbors, those same white neighbors, moved to LA and they became the police force. And so that's what I grew up with in Los Angeles. And so if you look at our story, it's not literally a translation of our story, but you'll see traces of Yasmin, traces of the Haitian Revolution, and that allows us to capture the emotion and the intensity that we need to keep going forward.
Thank you so much.
All right, we have a question from Sultan Sharif. Sultan, if you press the raise hand, you can ask your question directly.
Oh, hey guys.
Hey Sultan.
It's good to see you all. So yeah, I was wondering, I've been doing a lot of volumetric stuff with Depth Kit also, and with the increase of VR and AR devices disseminating during COVID, do you see this as a way, you talked a little bit earlier about making sure as you do distribution, you're mindful of access. And so do you see this as a way to perhaps contribute to greater proliferation of XR access in diverse communities is sort of part one. And then part two is how, or if you are adjusting your, a traditional sort of 2D distribution plan to capitalize on the increase in remote learning that's happening around the country. That's it.
Great questions.
That's a Yasmin question.
Oh, is it? Okay. Well, I'll start us off and you can add. I would say that with the increase of obviously XR devices during COVID and the adoption rate, and also just like, the hardware companies sort of throwing these more accessible and cheaper headsets, the goal is to get to, greater proliferation and access with this project. I'd say we're still in the step one with this project, which is like just completing it and getting it to a place where it is ready for distribution, ready to for more accessible audiences, and we're in the process of planning that. That's literally this phase that we're in right now, but that is the goal. And it's also thinking outside of headsets, because the point is to have people see this project. So we are looking at what other options what tiers of distribution exist beyond needing a headset to make sure that more audiences see this project. So that's all sort of in development right now. And I don't know if Michèle, Joy, would you like to add on to that or speak to the remote learning aspect?
Well, we are actively seeking ways to disrupt the normal distribution paradigm. And so we have a relationship with Afropunk and Color of Change, so that when concerts do return, we will create a tent in their music festivals and show this project. We are examining the use of 360, but and we're raising money to take it to schools. We think it's the next frontier. And if you look at what Scatter is doing next, and not only democratizing volumetric filmmaking production, but their outreach efforts, I think we're looking 5-10 years in the future. RADA is now in the early stages of re-envisioning Broadway and virtual reality. That is not for next week or next month or 3 years from now, but I think it's inevitable. And then the tools that Scatter has helped create and innovate are going to be nothing compared to what's coming in the next year or so. So we're looking out there. And thank you for your question. Sultan was my mentee many years ago.
I think I still am. Does it end? Did I get cut off? Am I one of those calls that doesn't get answered? No, just joking.
Great.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but thank you so much for this incredible presentation. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We'll be back next week at the same time, and hope you'll join us then. All right, bye-bye.